It's a beautiful thing to watch your kids become who they are. And I think as a parent, that requires a little bit of letting go. But I also would say that the more you give your child autonomy, even from a young age, the more you allow your child to choose their own clothes, like the more they will develop that sense of self. And also the more they will love and respect you, because the less you're trying to control them, the more they will feel loved and supported.
What do you really know about people who were born transgender? Have you ever met someone who's transgender? Well, if you're like me, you're curious but hesitant to ask questions. Well, welcome to Demystifying the Transgender Journey. In our conversations with people who were born transgender, their families, friends, and the professionals who support them, we ask probing questions and discover insightful and educational answers. You can also find more information on our website, thetransgenderjourney.com. Now let's get right into today's episode. Welcome to another episode of Demystifying the Transgender Journey. We are so glad you're here today. This is a place where real stories, honest conversations, and authentic voices come to life from people who were born transgender, their families, friends, coworkers, and healthcare workers who are on that journey with them. I'm Lynn Murphy. I'm author, speaker, leadership coach, and founder of Women Who Push the Limits. I'm the cisgender half of your host team. And joining me is the amazing Wendy Cole, an affirmed woman, transition mentor, insightful coach, and living proof that it's never too late to embrace your true self. She transitioned at age 67 and now helps others navigate life's biggest challenges because she's been through, very successfully, one of life's biggest challenges. So together we're bringing you conversations that open minds, touch hearts, and inspire change. So share these stories with people who are ready to learn more about the transgender experience. Now, on today's episode, we're interviewing the mother of a transgender child, and we're thrilled, absolutely thrilled to introduce you to our extraordinary guest, Callie Robinson. Callie is a writer, teacher, expatriate chef, and globetrotter who has never been afraid to rewrite the script on the page or in her life. She's published essays and recipes, won both writing and performance competitions, and is currently working on a screenplay that imagines the final conversation between the Trojan War's greatest warrior and its most tragic martyr. She's exploring grief, legacy, and what it means to live a true story. And that's what we're all about, is true stories. Callie's joining us today from Portland, Oregon, and dreams of attending a wedding on every continent. She says 3 down and 4 to go. But most of Callie's energy these days goes to parenting 3 exuberant, gender-expansive kids, all under the age of 10. Her oldest came out around kindergarten and now identifies somewhere on the spectrum between transgender and non-binary, and the twins are following their own beautifully fluid paths. In a world where turning children like Callie's into political talking points, Callie and her husband have been quietly doing something radical, treating gender a bit like being left-handed, simply one of many human variations. All you need to do is encourage, respect, and celebrate. So, Callie, thank you so much for being here today and for being willing to share both your family stories and your hard-won wisdom about raising kids who are free to be exactly who they are.
Thank you for having me. I'm really happy to be here to get to share my story and learn from you both as well.
Well, we're delighted to have a mother of gender fluid children who is going to just share an amazing story with us today. But let's start out talking about you a little bit. What I'm curious about is how your upbringing influenced you to be such an open and accepting and loving parent.
So I'm from Portland, born and raised. I would say if you have ever seen the show Portlandia, all of the stereotypes are true. I was raised mostly by my single mom. My parents got divorced when I was young, but we were very counterculture, very rebellious, but also very accepting. We used to joke that my mom's house was the home for wayward children. And so we really had this sort of open arms. Everyone is free to be who they want to be and who they really are, and we will accept you for who you are. My mom also loved a lot of amazing stories, amazing like queer stories. My favorite movie as a kid was like Priscilla, Queen of the Desert. My mom made me watch Dirty Dancing a lot as a child. So our house, we loved stories. We loved big, bold music. It was a really fun place to be. Everyone was really open-minded. My mom also loved theater, wasn't afraid to talk about issues with us. We're a pretty political family. I remember when I was 8 or 9, and in Oregon, there was a huge ballot measure about the rights of teachers and queer teachers. And we, discussed it at the dinner table and we learned about it in school. And I have an older brother, he's 2 years older, and I have two stepbrothers. And these kinds of conversations about the real state of the world were encouraged in my family. A lot of ruckus debates.
That's amazing because some families don't talk about that at all. I grew up many generations earlier than you did, and things like that were just not talked about at the dinner table. So,
Absolutely.
before you had children, did you know any people who were transgender or any knowledge about that? Any feelings about someone who was transgender?
Um, I had a lot of queer friends. I did have one friend who transitioned. We were friendly in my early college years, and then we had sort of stayed in not close contact, but so I sort of knew that they had transitioned. I'm not a close friend. I have a lot of queer friends, a lot of gay friends. My aunt is gay, and in my teens and 20s, I did a lot of theater, so that was very much a part of the queer community. And one of the things that's funny is that, I mean, as a kid, I just really loved stories about people that were transgendered. I loved movies and musicals, not only Priscilla, but like Hedwig. A lot of my favorite stories featured trans characters and queer characters. So even though, no, I would say I didn't really have a lot of close friends, it was always something that I thought was really beautiful and a story worth telling and a life worth living.
So then tell us about your children. You've got three children.
Yeah, I've got three kiddos. The oldest is Felix. And so Felix, as you said in the intro, was about 5 in kindergarten when they transitioned. I mean, honestly, my fashion sense is like, if it's free, it's me. So we had a lot of hand-me-downs. And I think we went about raising Felix with sort of like, if it's cheap, it's hand-me-downs. We were not the kind of parents that I know now that we're like, we're going to raise our children to be non-binary or we're going to purposefully give them all sorts of clothes. We just were kind of like, I'm just going to take what's cheap and free. And, if it's a dress is great. If it's pink, who cares? Whatever. So we weren't as intentional, but we were very just like, let Felix lead. And I remember they were about 3 years old. We were in the local Target shopping for a winter coat. And Felix saw a dress and was like, "Ooh, can I have that dress?" And I was like, "Yeah, of course." So we bought them a dress and then they lived in it pretty much every day for all of COVID. We were just sort of accepting and just like, whatever you want to wear, clothes are clothes, toys are toys. When they started kindergarten, they were 5. Felix has always been a pretty easygoing kid when they were little. They were very gregarious. We used to say that they're the goodwill ambassador. They make friends really easily and are really wanting to be in the world. And so they started kindergarten and it was a bit of a struggle. They were kind of sad and withdrawn. And, after a few weeks, we were sort of like, what's going on? And Felix told us that they, of course, had been wearing their favorite dress to school. And one of the girls on the playground said, only girls can wear dresses. And I said, "Well, are you a girl?" And Felix was like, "Yes, I'm a girl with a penis." I don't know if you need to bleep that, but and so it was like, "Great, okay, you're a girl. Easy as peasy." And that evening, I emailed their teacher and I said, "Hey, I just wanted to let you know, Felix told us this is what's going on. This is what happened. This other girl sort of made this comment." And the teacher immediately responded with, "Oh, usually I do my pronoun lesson in April when I actually teach the children the words like she, he, they, but I'll just do it tomorrow." By the end of the week, Felix and this girl were friends and
Mhm.
life was good. And they were like still friendly to this day. And it was wonderful for us at that point, again, it was something that I was excited about. I don't feel like I knew a lot about, but was just kind of like, okay, let's see what happens. So we did what I do whenever I'm faced with a problem, which is that the first thing I do is buy kids' books. So we like went out and we got like I Am Jazz and Crayon Story and a bunch of other ones is sort of like, how can we talk to Felix about this and help them understand that it's normal? So between kindergarten and maybe second grade, they use she pronouns. And then around second grade, I would say they kind of transitioned more to a non-binary identity. They said that they feel more like a they. I think it's kind of both. But they do say that you can use any pronouns just as long as you use them respectfully. So I think I would say they present pretty female. They have long hair. though they just told me they want to get it cut because it's so long and they don't like brushing it. Felix and I look really similar. They kind of have my face. One of the twins more has Jay's face, and then the other one is sort of a mix. But Felix is like my mini me. Gentle features, long, dark eyelashes. So sort of presents female. And now I would say for us, it's not really about the definition, right? Like
Hmm.
what a kid identify as doesn't really matter. We want to support them. So I would say every month or so, every few months, we kind of ask all of our kids, like, what are your pronouns these days? But then we just kind of let them lead. I think especially for children, I mean, you said, right, like these kids are being used as political talking
Hmm.
points, but I don't think that's what it should be. I think that kids should just allowed to explore every part of their personality, right? Whether they want to be shy, whether they want to be boisterous, whether they love school, whether they love sports, right? Like all the different sort of things that make a person feel good. Like I think their gender expression and their clothing should just be a part of that. And everyone should get to explore. I don't think it needs to be pinned down, right? I look back at the phases that I went through in terms of like fashion. And I kind of see that as gender, right? For a lot of people, it's just a face you put on, right? It's how you feel the most comfortable in yourself. And I think that for us, it's just about allowing our kids to be confident in who they are and be their authentic selves, and then they get to explore.
And that way, their true personality comes out.
Hmm.
Whereas if you made them hide that, they would repress huge parts of their personality as well because they're busy hiding.
I think you're right because once you start hiding a little bit, you sort of hide everything. And Felix has always, they have always been so confident and had just this self-assuredness. And I've always said my goal for Felix is that they never get rid of that. I'm like, I wish I had that much
Yeah.
confidence, but they know who they are and they know what they want. And it's beautiful.
That's
But
the energy that other people are going to pick up. And the likelihood of being misgendered goes away because of that.
I don't know why it matters, right? To me, it's sort of like if you want to wear makeup, wear makeup. If you want to wear a dress, wear a dress. I know at some point they'll have to learn about, I would say, sort of how do you code professionalism and those sorts of
Hmm.
things. But especially now when they're kids, I'm like, just let them have fun.
Right.
Well, and,
Um,
and just to be so open to that, you're allowing that to come out. To play devil's advocate for a minute, some people will say, oh, see, it's just a phase. And they talk about being transgender as being just a phase, and they're going to be cats one day and puppies another day and things like that.
yeah, I think that if it's a phase, okay. If it's not, okay too, right? You know what I mean? But you have to explore. You have to be able to feel open and to listen to yourself, right? And have that permission. And I think that childhood is that time. And maybe Felix will come back and be like, no, I really do feel that I am fully a woman and go down that path. Maybe they'll stay in the non-binary path. Like, I don't know, right? I'm not Felix, but I want them to have the opportunity to chart their own path and not feel like any of it was a mistake. One of the things I hear from some of the other parents of trans kids in my community is that, especially around those like awkward teenage years, trans kids really get to hate that younger gendered self. And that's something that really makes me sad. And I understand like being a teenager, you're always full of angst. And I imagine even when I, as a cisgender teen, was looking at myself, photos of like, what was I wearing? What was I thinking? I think my sort of vision, my kind of like goal, what I think would be like the most beautiful, perfect society would be if all people could just sort of explore and feel it out. And then once they decided, they got to live their lives and we just didn't have to have a conversation about it. You
Well,
know,
it's nobody else's business. I mean, as long as someone's not hurting someone else, why do people care about how someone dresses or what they call themselves or any of that? To me, it's so closed-minded to think that you know everything about everybody else who comes in your sphere.
right. Or like, why does it matter? Why does my passport need to even have a gender marker?
Yeah.
Sure, okay, if I'm going to see the doctor, like, but like for most medical procedures, even then, it's like, why? Especially because most medical science, most tests are done on men and women aren't even considered. Maybe if you're getting a prescription, that might have a difference, but the real biological differences are so few and far between. Gender is this construct, right? Like our society created this silly thing and said, we're going to have a binary. What's the point? How does it serve us? No one
Yeah.
has been able to give me a really good reason for like holding up this male and female false construct.
It gives
So,
people something to argue about.
yeah.
And that's the only answer I can come up with to that question is,
Yeah.
so that we can disagree and so there can be conflict, which we need much less of that and more of what you're doing.
Yeah. Just to sort of finish, I also
Mhm.
have two 7-year-olds, my twins, and Ari, who is also non-binary. So the interesting thing is that when Felix started to transition, I felt like, just naturally our older sibling is like wearing dresses, you kind of follow in their footsteps. So Ari and Leo, both the twins, really also used to just like love to wear dresses and were sort of more fluid in their gender expression, even again, probably as young as like 3, because, when we started sort of like reading all these books and having these conversations, like they were, 3, 4. And then Leo sort of settled into sort of a male identity. So he goes by he pronouns. And then Ari has always sort of had a non-binary identity. They also, I would say, very present female, started to grow their hair out, prefer to wear dresses, but has never really claimed she. When Ari's a little bit more timid, I sort of Felix is this like big, confident, boisterous human. And actually, like Felix has inspired some of their classmates to come out because they were so vocal about being
Right.
trans. Even in kindergarten and first grade, they were like, I'm trans and this is awesome and this is who I am. Ari has always been a little bit more timid. They're more shy, more introverted. I would say similarly, they've always been clear about like, I have this non-binary identity and, I sort of feel like both. They tend to be friends with girls and hang out more with girls. But I would say of all of the kids, they are the best at sports. They love playing wall ball and like, so I mean, Ari can kind of go both ways in terms of who they're friendly with, what they're interested in. We're just letting these kids be who they are and be what they want. And I also think that like, especially when it comes to clothing and gender expression, I think that I'm going to say two things. One, I think that learning to listen to yourself, right? Learning to have that like knowing and figuring out what's true is really hard. I think I would say even as a 42-year-old woman, a mom of 3 kids, like I struggle with this. But I think that that's how you can really live your best life and your most authentic life. And so I think that that's one of these things where like I want my kids to be free to explore, to learn to listen to themselves, to do what's the most true for them. And I sort of see the clothes as kind of a secondary thing. I think it's something that
Mhm.
just, to me, it doesn't matter. And then once they really do start to feel like, okay, who am I? How do I feel on the inside? What is my full gender? Then they can figure that out and then we'll go on their path. They're pretty young right now. The idea of sort of gender expression and like whether you're dressing more butch or more femme, I think is something that most people, and I think especially women, deal with every day. We just don't talk about it. I read Eddie Izzard's biography, and she is a, very famous comedian and actress and did an amazing stand-up comedy that I loved and watched over and over again in high school in heels. And just sort of made these jokes about being a transvestite. But anyway, a few years ago, I read their biography and they talked about like every day they get up and they look at their clothes and it's sort of like, do I feel more femme today? Do I feel more butch? And I feel like I experience that too. I think most people do, right? Like, do I want to wear a dress? Do I want to wear pants? Like, what is the image that I'm trying to portray? What does my confidence need? What does the situation require? And so, again, I think that this is sort of this idea of like a gender identity or sort of like gender expression. I think we all experience it more
Mhm.
often and we just don't talk about it. If you look into history, right? Like the history of women wanting to wear pants is this huge thing. We had to fight to get pockets and we had to fight to get pants. But I would say that if you asked most people, every day when they go to the closet, like they probably have a little bit of that debate themselves, right? I just sort of wish we all could agree, like, yes, it's all on a spectrum and we all deal with this all the time. That
Mhm.
means it's not a big deal, right? Like,
Shouldn't be.
right? It shouldn't be.
It's the same for all of us, whether we're dressed up, dressed down, the colors we choose, having a good hair day, having a bad hair day, whatever it is. But we make those changes all the time. So why try and channel somebody into this tiny little box?
When we transition as older adults, anywhere from 20s, especially 30s and up, we have to go through all of that reversing, all the socialization, all the beliefs that we've carried about ourselves that enabled us to hide and stay safe in society, please our parents, please the people at school, be who we're expected to be. You've eliminated that from their lives, which is huge. It's going to make for such more well-adjusted, real people as they grow up into adult life. And you should be very proud of that. You're amazing.
Oh, thank you.
So what happens at school? What kind of exposure have they had in classrooms with teachers and other students?
Yeah, for the most part, their teachers have been very supportive. There's two classrooms, so there's maybe 50 kids total. I would say five to maybe seven of them are trans or non-binary. I don't know if that's just because we're like in liberal Portland or this neighborhood or because the environment at the school that the school creates is so beautiful and open. But yeah, Felix has a number of other classmates and friends that are trans. There is also a trans affinity group for kids starting in, I think, second or third grade. Felix's school is also K-8. So there's someone who's on staff whose job is like social justice and runs programs. So they run this trans affinity group. Felix has always called it the trans infinity group. So, and I'm like, yes, trans infinity. That's what we want. So that was like every other Thursday during lunch. They could go and meet with friends, and the leader of the group would talk about like trans icons or just experiences, age appropriate, sort of a little bit of education about the trans experience. And then once a month, they have like an allies group, so all the people who are in Trans Infinity can bring a friend and they like make like Taylor Swift bracelets and stuff. So it's really beautiful. I think the school has done a wonderful job of supporting these kids and creating an environment where they all feel open and they can enjoy and they can celebrate. And what's interesting to me is like, especially with the younger kids, gender expression isn't about sexual identity. And it'll be curious to sort of see what happens in a few years as those more amorous feelings and hormones start to rage. So Felix has always had really wonderful teachers. And really, it's always started like the beginning of the year. We just email them and say, like, Felix uses this pronouns. And sometimes they forget, or it's like a little slow to adapt, or if Felix changes midway through the school year, like, that has caused problem. But otherwise, they have been very accepted. Their teachers are always really appreciative of them in class. And the school has gender neutral bathrooms. And when Felix was in kindergarten, they were in a different building and they hadn't built it yet. So the teacher was basically said Felix can use whichever bathroom that they want. And at that time, Felix once told me that really they liked the girls' bathroom better because it smelled better. But then they moved to a different building in first grade, and so they just can, use the bathroom that they need, and that's kind of the only sort of thing where it's really come into play. I think I do remember when Felix first transitioned, I told my best friend, and Felix and her daughter had gone to pre-K together, to like a daycare together. And so I told my friend, and she said she talked to her kids, and they were like, "Oh, yeah, that makes sense." One time in preschool, we did a boys versus girls Olympics event, and Felix was on the girls' team. And it was like we hadn't even heard about this. Like at that time, that daycare didn't even think it was noteworthy. So
No big
yeah.
deal.
Yeah, no big deal. And I think again, because Felix is just so friendly and gregarious, like they especially have had no problems. And in terms of Ari, similarly, like all the teachers have been really great. They're making friends. Again, they have friends that are female, they have friends that are male. I love talking about this, especially with the kids at school, because I feel like this is what it should be like for all
Mhm.
children. It
Mhm.
doesn't need to be a thing. And I think the fact that all the teachers really responded in a positive way and they were just like, okay, let's go. It has been sort of the best possible scenario. Like to Wendy's point, I think about a lot of kids who don't live in Portland, right? Who live in the more conservative parts of the country who
The
don't have that,
majority of the country.
right? Who just don't feel safe at
Very.
school.
Should be a
Yeah.
model for schools, but people aren't doing that. You talked about reading kids' books to the kids when they were younger. What did you have to do to educate yourself, or has it just kind of been a gradual sponging up of what's going on with the kids?
So the first thing I'll say is that when Felix first came out, I actually really had a hard time. Not because I was like sad about them being trans. And it was really interesting because a long while, it was maybe a few months, I was like just sad and overwhelmed and angry. And I was like, what is going on? Like, what is all of this bringing up for me? And I realized that I was really sad that the United States is not a safe place for trans people. And I felt like a lot of grief around the fact that Felix's life if they were trans, if they were non-binary, it was going to be a lot harder. And this was even, a few years ago, and it was like we were during the hopeful Biden era, but I still knew, that like unfortunately that's the reality in the United States. And so first I got sort of sad, realizing that like their life was going to be harder than if they had just been a cisgendered white middle class boy. I think that was the other thing is like I was like I want to make sure their childhood is just so happy and full
Mhm.
and full of love. But
Right.
then after that, I sort of got mad and I definitely like went through like okay, I'm gonna get involved. And I was just like, let's tear this down. Let's tear this patriarchy down. And through my work, through our employee resource groups at work, I spent a lot of time like meeting other parents who either were trans or queer or who had queer kids. That was, I think, the first thing to just sort of talk to other parents to sort of say, like, okay, what are you doing? How are you supporting your kids? One of the things that I really realized in that sort of first moment of turmoil is that I was really worried about Felix's safety. It's a huge issue. Trans women are attacked and murdered, I would say more than any other group of women, possibly with the exception of Native American women. And so that was one of those things I realized, like, okay, I also am going to make sure when Felix gets a little bit older that we do have some of those conversations about like personal safety and how to keep yourself safe so that I feel that they can go out in the world and protect themselves. But in terms of how I sort of got myself educated, I would say the number one thing again was just like finding other people who are going through the same experience. I do love kids' books, so I found a few kids' books, both for me and for the kids. And then I would say I read a lot of other sort of biographies or autobiographies of queer folks, trans folks. That's sort of how I get to know the world. There was probably a year or two where I just kind of read some of those like firsthand narratives. I think that's kind of the story that I like to hear. And I think that's, everyone's story is so different. And I have other friends in Portland who are non-binary, so we sort of talked to them. Again, just kind of got involved in the queer community at my work. And yeah, sort of met people. In terms of sort of learning, I don't know how much there was sort of learning. I did read a few books about gender as a construct, but I wouldn't say that it was sort of new information. It was just sort of this kind of reminder of like, a lot of this stuff, like, especially with little kids, you can just be open-minded about it. You just don't have to put too much on it. I've always sort of had a liberal and queer outlook on the world. So there was a couple other books I also follow. I did start to follow a few social media accounts. I love Dr. Blair Peters, a few other, just to get a little bit more of that in my feed. I also learned a little bit that way. Some of the issues I love to learn more about, like especially around sports, I love athlete ally. But I think that for the most part, I think the learning was sort of how, again, do I just create this environment that's like open for Felix and for Ari and Leo? And then as my kids get older, once we do need to start having the conversations about hormones, like then I will learn more. For this first few years, it's just really been more about like, how do you listen to yourself? How do you love yourself? And how do I let them know that this is okay, right? And that
Mhm.
they can be who they are and that they don't have to fall to that peer pressure or feel that they need to conform to society's ideas about gender, if they feel that they're different.
You're building the foundation now for what's to come later because now you've got the openness and the acceptance. They've got self-acceptance, confidence, those types of things, and you're in an environment where they're thriving. So once you build that foundation and you hit the teenage years, I think every parent who probably hits the teenage years with their kids thinks, "Oh my God, are we going to get through this?" But you sounds
Yeah.
like you've got a really strong foundation for getting through the HRT and all of those conversations, even the sex talks.
And the self-acceptance that you're allowing them to explore and find is huge. Again, that's something that people who transition at older ages have to go through and find that as if they were 5 and 6 year old children.
Yeah. I know this stuff is on the horizon. Felix is 9. So I have one friend, they were telling me their kiddo is, I think, 11. And so they were like, fine, like, okay, we have to sit down and have this conversation about like whether or not they wanted to do hormone blockers, like what kind of treatments they wanted to start. But it was also like the first thing that they had to be like, let me describe to you what's going to happen during puberty. And her daughter was like, oh God. It was like, well, if you don't take this medicine, like you'll get hair. She was like, no, ah. So
All kinds of nasty things happen from that testosterone.
Right. So, yeah, I think it's like once we get to that point, we'll figure it out. And then I will learn more with
Yeah,
them.
Mhm.
as you need. And
And
things change
blockers
too.
are reversible.
Yeah.
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 So it sounds like it was always kind of a gradual progression with Felix. So was there any point coming out other than the dress when they were 3?
Yeah, it was that moment, again, sort of in kindergarten, where they actually shouted from the top of their lungs, like, I'm a girl with a penis.
Mm,
But then it was just, we were kind of like, okay. And then it was like the next day, everything, it was just like everything was different and
mm,
nothing was different.
okay.
Because they're at that point, they still were wearing dresses every day and they had been for years. And so we sort of said, do you want us to call you our daughter? You want like Ari and Leo to call you their sister? Every few months, we kind of have that check in again. Do you want us to say son or daughter or kiddo or child? I think sort of the start of every school year, we kind of have that conversation again of like, okay, we have to fill out these forms. This upcoming summer, Felix is going to be going to summer camp. So we had to have the conversation of like, which cabin do you want to be in? Where do you want us to go?
Mm,
In kindergarten, they were wearing dresses, but they were still getting sort of a short haircut. So I feel like maybe around the age like 5 or 6, that was one of the first times they said like, okay, I want to grow my hair out. Funny, Felix has like never been really interested in makeup or anything like that. But actually, Leo, male identifying twins, he's the one that's most interested in the makeup that I have. One of the books that we used to read was like about a little kid who got into his mom's clothes and her makeup. I know that they've seen it, but it's funny because like Leo will be the one, he'll be like, can I do makeup? And then, or he wants to do it himself. And then he ends up with like big raccoon eyes and these like hilariously red, huge red cheeks and lipstick.
It's
Um,
perfectly normal for prepubescent children to experiment and try it out.
yeah,
mm, yeah.
exactly.
After they pass 8 or 9, that's when it starts to level out and change, and they start to find themselves.
Yeah.
Mm.
He sort of was like, used to wear more dresses and used to have sort of a more fluid. And then he kind of was like, no. And I recently I said to him, like, how come you stopped wearing dresses? I noticed you haven't worn them recently, expecting him to sort of say something like, oh, maybe I'm not feeling that anymore. And he was like, I don't like the dresses that you picked out for me.
Wrong
Okay.
style, mom.
Yeah, it was like these winter dresses are not as great as the summer dresses. I'm like,
Oh, I love
okay.
the summer dresses.
Yeah,
So
so
what kid hasn't said that to their mother, right?
Mhm.
right.
Doesn't matter. It's like, Mom, really? You want me to wear that?
And I would say oftentimes we sort of have to go to them, right? And say, like, are we using the right words? Also, oftentimes, if any of the kids are meeting a new friend or meeting, like, we did a summer camp last year, so they had like babysitters. So anytime we're sort of introducing people, I do try to encourage the kids to be like, hey, can you tell us your name and your pronouns? Because that also is a sort of is like a cheater way for me to find out how they're feeling. And again, because I'm cheap and lazy, the way that I have been getting them clothes for most of their life is that like, I do the shopping or the acquiring, a lot of like hand-me-downs from friends. But more recently, I have started to let Felix come with me to the store. So that's been interesting to see when they are seeing all the clothes on the rack, kind of like what they're more drawn towards. And I would say it's very much both. They sometimes want things that are really girly. Sometimes they pick out like ugly camo. And I'm like, okay, but
But they have choices, and you're
yeah,
giving them opportunity to have choices.
yeah.
You've raised these kids in, I want to say, a protected environment, a very positive, very caring, very loving environment. And yet we know, like Wendy said, the rest of the country almost is not like that. What do you do to give them skills or give them tools for dealing with those kinds of things if and when they happen? Those negative responses from people.
I would say it starts with that, like, just reassurance that they are valid, that their gender identity is what they choose. And we give them a voice. I come from a family of arguers. Like, our kids very much have opinions. And so I think one of those things is just so we cultivate them to have a voice and to use it. They are not silent and they know who they are. There have been maybe a few moments where they've had to educate their peers, if they hear like, well, that's girl clothes or that's girl toys. But we repeat that a lot. Like, There's no such thing as girl clothes. There's no such thing as girl toys. And they sometimes will come home with it. There have been a few times where maybe one of the twins will have said something like that. And I'm like, I'm like, we know that's not true. I think we also try to make sure that there are adults in their life who are equally open-minded, who are non-binary or trans, so that they also see that these people exist in the world. And we want them to have some sort of, if not role models, just like other adults that they know. So the kids take an Indonesian martial art, sort of a kung fu, but it's called pukulan. So they go to a studio here in Portland that's very queer friendly. There's a lot of amazing, amazing role models for them there. And again, at their school, there's a few queer folks, non-binary folks. They've had a lot of daycare teachers and babysitters. So I think also just sort of exposing them to older adults and to other adults who are supportive and who are willing to give them that kind of gentle correction or then like cheering them on and pumping them up. In terms of the protection, I mean, we're being very careful.
Mhm.
I don't see any travel plans to any red states in the near future.
I wonder
Um,
why.
it was funny. We were traveling through LAX recently, and even, I mean, LAX, but I definitely had to talk to the kids and be like, okay, like, let's be careful what we say. So we have had some of those conversations about like, there are people in this world who don't agree with us, and we try to be truthful while not scaring them. I
Right.
think developmentally, like 7 and 9 year olds, we still want them to have hope and want them to understand that, well, there are some people that have these views, like there are other people that don't. As they continue to get older and more independent, I think this will be a bigger concern. I would approach it sort of similarly in that I don't think it's any different. I think that, like people are going to have conflict. That's normal. People are going to have different opinions. So, like, I would want my children, if they had a disagreement with a friend about anything, I would want them to know how to be respectful. Or if someone says something that they find insulting, if it's not about their clothes, right? If it's about their hair, it's about their face, it's about their skin color, I would want them to approach that conversation in the same way of like, if someone says something to you that's insulting, how are you going to respond? It's no different than any other sort of thing about their body that
Hmm.
someone might comment on.
It sounds
It's,
like you're teaching them that those are other people's opinions. They don't detract from them or invalidate them. They're
yeah,
valid as they are.
exactly. Right. And if someone says something to you don't like, you can say it to them, respond to them kindly, but like they
Walk
definitely,
away.
yeah,
Well,
right?
you're giving them great skills, and those are going to serve them for the rest of their lives.
Exactly.
It's amazing to hear the story. This is what it can be like.
That self validation is so important.
It's also something that like I can only do so much, right? As a mom, this one's hard, but but I also feel like they're going to go out in the world, and so they have to also learn how they want to interact with other people. And again, I want them to know that they're loved and that they are supported. And for me, that's kind of the most important thing. It
They'll
can always,
attract the right people around them who will engage with them and love them.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. At least that's my hope.
So, what are your thoughts about approaching puberty? Is this another situation where it's up to Felix to do what they want?
Yeah, I absolutely would say I would let them lead. We have had some real conversations with them about kind of the state of the world right now. I am slightly concerned that if they start down the trail, right, that like some of the medicines that they want might not be available. But I would also do whatever we can to make sure that they are getting the treatment that they want. Again, like luckily we live in a blue state. Everything is still available. It's on the table right now. So we'll all sort of learn about it as a family and then figure out the best path forward. And then if their rights start to be taken away, if the treatments that they want start to be taken away, we will cross that bridge when we come to it. I think Felix is definitely aware of the political climate right now. And they have even said some things like, oh, well, I can use he pronouns if I need. And we're sort of like, but we don't want you to, we want you to be
Mm.
who you are. I think for us, it will get a little bit more complicated, a little bit more complex in the next few years. As long as we can all kind of come from that place of truth and love, we'll get through it. We'll figure it out,
Yeah.
you know?
So, being in a blue state, you don't have any problem accessing the medical. care that you need for them now?
No, my understanding is that the two or three of the major healthcare providers were sort of forced to make a statement that said that they would not perform gender affirming surgery on minors. But I'm of the opinion that like I was like I wouldn't want my minor to have a
Yeah,
surgery for any reason.
No, no kid under 18 is going to be operated on by any surgeon in this country.
Right,
That's
anywhere.
ridiculous.
One or two of the major health insurance, like they agreed, and I was a little bit like, oh man. The other two were like, no, we're not even going to add this language to anything. So the definitely services are still available,
Yeah, they
you know,
add
for
that language just to appease the felon in charge and his followers.
yeah.
That's it.
I think about like when Felix was a baby, like weeks old, months old, they had a tongue tie. And so we had some breastfeeding challenges. And my lactation consultants who were pro breastfeeding said, well, you should go get this procedure where they like laser cut the underside of the baby's tongue so that the tongue moves more so that you can get more milk out. Um, and we met with the dentist who would do the procedure. And the dentist said to me, you're choosing to give your child elective surgery. Like, you don't need to do that, you know? And they were like, yes, it will help with breastfeeding, but your other option is to just continuing doing some breastfeeding and some bottle feeding. And so the surgeon was like, as a mom, what do you want to do? And they were like, you don't have to do this. Like they sort of said to me very clearly, like, this is an elective surgery. And I was like, oh, I don't want to do that. I don't want to make my child have surgery. It's just sort of like the idea that people do this to their children. This just makes me so angry that like that they're worried about these evil parents that are trying to force their children to have surgery. I mean, it's just
yeah. It's terrible that this is going on in the United States right now.
Even more ridiculous that people think that kids go to school and come home changed.
yeah.
Yeah, that's crazy. So, what surprises you about your children?
What surprises me about my children? Um, One of my things you can tell I'm very big on like openness and acceptance. So of course we have a lot of conversations about kindness, but you know, they are three biologically male kids. They love to fight, they love to argue, and they just are always constantly butting heads. And so the things that really surprise me are like the moments of tenderness. Even though we try to have this sort of expansive view of gender, I would say I see some of the stereotypes, some of the things about sort of boys being rambunctious, and I see that kind of played out with my kids. So I think that those moments are the ones that I'm like the most surprised and just they really touch me and make me happy. I do hope that my kids go out in the world and are just aren't the sort of stereotypical males. I hope they don't become the sort of worst of the white cis heterosexual population. You know, that population gets a bad rap for a lot of bad behavior. And I sort of have always just wanted my kiddos to be better than that. One recent example, Leo, he is like one of the most empathetic kids you'll ever meet. We were doing our parent teacher conferences recently, and the counselor said that it's called the no thank you bin in the lunchroom at the school. And so kids, if they don't want food, they can leave it in the no thank you bin. Or if they're still hungry for more and they need like a snack, they can go and grab a snack. And so the counselor said that Leo knew that her favorite crackers were the Cheez-Its and brought her like a bag of Cheez-Its from the no thank you bin. She said that it was her first time in all of her years of being a counselor that a child had ever like thought of her needs first and brought her a
Wow.
snack. So I think th those moments are really, really something that I cherish. Another one recently was the twins. Again, they love to wrestle. They're like little puppies, you know, they just love to wrestle and climb on things and fight. But we went to go get our vaccines recently. Leo was really freaking out, and Ari like stood there with him and held his hand. You know, those are the moments when they really, you know, love each other and are so demonstrative in their love for each other that I I find so sweet.
Well, and it's interesting when we think this is female behavior, this is male behavior, this is female, this is male, but that's all fluid in all of us anyway. Whether your child is cisgender or transgender, there are times that you're going to be expecting them to do something more physical or, you know, tougher. And then there are times like that when they, my goodness, hold each other's hands and comfort the twin. And those are all human behaviors. And to try and
Mhm.
categorize those and say that there's a line between what's feminine and what's masculine does not make any sense. It's all
And
merged.
Yeah,
and
I
no
think
no one is absolutely male or female.
Yeah.
right? It's the sort of society has decided that certain behaviors are masculine and certain behaviors are
Binary.
feminine. So it's this binary that we all know is false, right? It's just
Mhm.
nonsense. And so it's really important to me that the kids have a full emotional world, that they understand their entire emotional universe, and that they are able to care for other humans and be empathetic towards other humans. And so that's something that's really important to me.
That's something
Um,
that so many parents miss, especially with their male children, especially.
Mhm.
Yeah. It's just so silly. Why did we all decide, to go along with it? And like, why are there certain jobs that have to be only for
Mhm.
men or only for women? It's
Exactly.
just it's silly. And I would say, like, for Felix, I think again, the thing that surprises me over and over again is just their confidence and their self-knowledge.
That's something you've instilled in them.
Mhm.
I appreciate that.
Oh,
Um,
really?
what's so surprising about it is that I feel like they've sort of surpassed me. I've tried to build this in them, but they just continue to
Well,
know
you have all
themselves.
your childhood stuff to overcome.
Yeah.
And you were raised a girl, which in this society, you probably had some
Mhm.
challenges growing up too.
Oh,
Right.
absolutely. Yeah. And again, I was raised by a single mom. So yeah, sort of that strong, independent, hyper independent female, definitely.
Yeah. So, what advice do you have to give to other parents who may not have the awareness that you have or the upbringing that you've had? What can you tell other parents to do or to look for or how to think about their children who may be experimenting with their gender?
Yeah, I would say the first thing is just love your kids. Love them
Mhm.
for who they are. I would say don't become a parent unless you can love your kid if they're queer or trans or disabled, you
Or
know,
cisgender.
or cisgendered, right? Like choose choose to have children knowing that you have to love them for who they are, not who you want them to be. I think that that's like another one of those sort of societal things that we
Hmm.
make these kids a reflection. They are a reflection of ourselves, which is true, but they are their own people. I would say again, creating a container, creating a space for your kids to be able to explore and feel loved and supported no matter what choice they make. Like if they know that you are a safe person and a loving parent, like they might still listen to you, right? Their exploration might be smaller, but that will serve you. And I think in terms of people who sort of haven't deconstructed yet that like gender is a construct and
Mhm.
that like gender roles are not real. I remember actually I did study anthropology in college, and there was this really great book that I read. It's called The Headman Was a Woman. It's sort of about cultures around the world where there are multiple genders, where there are six
Mhm.
different genders. And, more indigenous cultures actually have a more expansive understanding of the trans experience of gender. So I would say if you're the kind of wants to do research, that's a great place to start. What I think is so beautiful about the trans experience is that I really believe that trans people they're better at being human than the rest of us. I think we have a lot to learn from trans people, and I understand completely why they often are shamans or
Hmm.
healers in more indigenous cultures because I think they have this duality that unfortunately the rest of us don't have, right? This duality of experience, this ability to see the whole. And I think that that's very beautiful. If if that is an area where you can start to look and to be inspired, but to understand that it's a beautiful thing to watch your kids become who they are. And I think as a parent, that requires a little bit of letting go,
Hmm.
which is
Or a
hard,
lot.
a lot of letting go. But I also would say that the more you give your child autonomy, even from a
Hmm.
young age, or the more you allow your child to choose their own clothes, like the more they will develop that sense of self. And also the more they will love and respect you, because the less you're trying to control them, the more they will feel loved and supported. I think that's that sort of that foundation, but it definitely requires some letting go. And maybe, we were never sort of the parents who like wanted to dress our kids up. Like, I don't understand, mostly because I'm like, I got better things to do than picking out my children's clothes. Children are not dolls. If you want to dress something, get a doll and you can dress that. have this child and watch them unfold. Being a parent isn't, I think we think it's more about modeling and more about working the clay, when really it's just about holding the container and watching your
Mhm.
child blossom. You know,
Yeah.
you're creating this foundation of love and support, and then they will blossom.
Mhm.
To me,
But
that's the role of the parent.
and that's good advice for parents of whatever kind of child they have. It doesn't apply just to children who are transgender. So,
Yeah, I think we don't have this conversation a lot where like kids who are two culture kids, right? Or three culture kids,
mhm.
and like whether or not they're learning if one of their parents speaks another language, right? It's
Mhm.
like how do you create that container and help your kid be excited about their different culture, their different language of origin without pressuring them into it, you know? And I
Mhm.
think it's sort of the same thing of like you have to create this container of love and fun and enthusiasm. That's what kids like, right? If you make it fun,
Mhm.
then they can kind of blossom into it. So,
Yeah. Well, thank you for doing all of that. And in our country, especially, they fear, they resist anything that's different, that's outside their little box. What recommendations do you have for how do we bridge those gaps? How do we bridge those differences?
hmm, I don't, I would say education, but we've been systematically undercutting education for a
Yeah,
long time.
yeah.
I would say just remember that we're all human. I think to me, this is how you
Mhm.
bridge the gap, right? The rhetoric has gotten so noisy, and both sides have really taken the tact of if I dehumanize these other people, then they're
Right.
easier to suppress. But at the end of the day, like we are all human beings. We all, we have our basic needs of like food, water, love. We all feel happy the
Safety.
same, safety, right? Like we all feel sadness the same. We all feel anger the same. So I think if you meet people who are different than you, it's about looking for those commonalities and celebrating the differences, right? And being curious and wanting to understand the differences versus immediately being defensive. I try to live from a mindset of abundance. I think there's also sort of a
Mhm.
scarcity mindset in the culture that's taken over in the overculture in the last couple decades, where if trans people have more rights, I will have less rights. And I just don't think that's
Yeah.
true. I think there's more than enough freedom for everyone, more than enough jobs, more than enough food. I think if we operate from this mindset of abundance, then we're not as defensive. And I would also say, I think maybe if you are a person who feels more conservative or more traditional and you meet someone who's like, whoa, a little different, take a moment to investigate your
Get to know
reaction,
them.
right? What is it about that that scares you? And I would guess that a
Hmm.
lot of times it's that they are so open and it's that you feel repressed. Maybe you grew up in a very traditional gendered role in your family and you wished that you could have fought against it, but you didn't. Because there is something about trans people that is free, right? Like,
Oh
especially I
yeah.
think people that transition as older adults,
Yep.
you had to go through this whole thing, but you looked in yourself and you listened and you said, no, I want to be free. I'm going to make this choice, this very hard choice. And a lot of us don't do that. American society is a pretty conformist society. And so
Right.
I think that there's something about the trans experience that's very scary. And it's because people have taken that autonomy and that freedom. If you find yourself meeting someone and being like, ooh, why am I fear? And then you realize that it's because maybe you felt repressed. Like, how do you love yourself a little bit and open yourself up a little, you
The
know?
sad part is that requires that person to have self-awareness. And a lot of people are not self-aware.
Yeah.
I've been told after I've come out to heterosexual males, a group of them, oh, well, we liked you before. Now we admire you. And I asked why. And they said, because you're living true to yourself, and most people don't.
Yeah.
These are just normal heterosexual men that I came out to.
Yeah.
And that was a very powerful moment.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm impressed and glad to hear that that was their reaction, right? That they
Yeah,
understood that. I think that's the thing with gender society, gendered roles. Like we talk a lot about how it represses women, but it also represses men. And their lives are less beautiful, less authentic because they also have to fall into these roles. I think
Well,
the other thing that I would say is like, come over here. where we don't believe in that gender normative bullshit. It's awesome.
Yeah,
Like that would be my other,
exactly.
I don't know if that's advice or just like something that I would say to people, but it's like being true to yourself, accepting people, living a life where people can be open. It's way better. Like not
Yeah.
being repressed all the time is a much better existence.
And I
So
Oh,
joined
come
the
on over.
I joined the women's group that is working around the state, and they've included all of LGBT in it because
Mm,
women's rights and LGBT rights are intertwined. There are
and
people that do recognize that, but you have to live in certain parts of the country to find that.
yeah, absolutely. I think also it just comes down to I think humanity, like we have to just go back to having conversations. I think that's
yeah,
the other thing, right? Like, and this is why this podcast is so beautiful, but we spend so much time on our phones and social media. We're not actually in conversation. I think if you look at sort of how the views of just gay marriage have changed in the last 50 years,
Mhm.
it's partly because more people were talking about it, right? It was becoming part of the culture, but also just because we got to the point where everyone realized that they did know someone that was gay
Right.
or
hmm
lesbian, right? The trans population is much smaller, so we probably won't get there. But I think it's going to be a same sort of thing of like people just realizing that they actually do know someone who's trans. It's not this big scary thing, but I think it's going to be about these people. I think it's going to be about these people to people connections, not necessarily a big
Right.
cultural movement.
Right. I
when I start talking to people about what I'm doing, people I've known for years, then they say, "Oh, my niece is transgender," or my coworker transitioned last year, or whatever it is. People are connected to people that, I mean, they don't wear a badge that says, "I know someone who's transgender," but it's not a big secret to a lot of people. It's just that
Yeah.
nobody talks about it. So I think what you're saying is once it's more visible, once I'm hoping that we build a huge audience here and get the word out.
Yeah. I think one other thing I'll say is listen to young people. Like one of the
Mhm.
things that's been amazing about this is my kids are like, whatever, okay. And then they just, you know what I mean? They're like, yep, I got it. So I think that's the other thing. And I mean, their classmates, again, there's so many people. My kids are Gen Alpha, but I feel like even Gen Z is like more queer, more non-binary than any other generation. So I do think that I sort of see the young people. I see the sea change happening slowly, and I think it will come from the kids because they are very aware of the fact that all of this stuff is a construct, and this sort of like
Mhm.
heteronormative ideas about gender and sex are false. And for them, it's obvious. I think the question, right, is going to be to those of us that agree, can we sort of protect those ideas and those spaces so that they can get a little bit older and start becoming in charge? But I think about even young 20 somethings in the workplace, right? They come into the workplace, a lot of them are non-binary. They expect to be treated with respect. They expect to have facilities that they can use, and they're not willing to
Mhm.
for older generations to be like, what are you talking about? Like, just like this is normal. This is who we are.
Mhm.
Right.
And so like when I think about young people today and the youth, I hate to say it like that, but like that gives me a lot of hope. Because I feel like as a generation, they just sort of innately understood this or sort of the culture changed around them. But for me, it feels like, when I tell people like that my kids are trans, it's like the older they are, the harder it is for them to understand. The younger they are, the faster it is for them to understand
Right.
and get with the program.
And a lot of it's how you were raised, how you're raising your kids. I was reminded of a trip we took to the Galapagos where the animals are not afraid of people. They take us to these different islands and say 6 feet away from the animals. Well, the animals didn't get those memos, so they're up close and personal. Sea lions are wanting to swim with people and see what those cameras are all about. And it occurred to me through this trip that the animals were never taught to fear.
Right.
And
Yeah.
what we do is we teach our children to be afraid. We teach each other, oh, you got to be afraid of people who are transgender because well, let's see, it's not contagious. Why would you be afraid of them? Okay, the
They're
bathroom
different.
thing. But we teach those things, and that's what I'm hearing you say too with these generational changes, society changes, because somewhere people started to open up and then open up a little bit more and open up a little bit more, and
Yeah.
hope that is hopeful to think
And
of
that's how
too.
we'll change this culture.
A little
Yeah.
at a time. Yeah.
Yeah. I think
Yeah.
about, especially with like women's rights and just sort of women's equality. So again, like I'm in my 40s, and unfortunately, me and a lot of my peers, we have experienced sexual harassment in the workplace, or,
Mhm.
older men making sort of terrible comments and all that kind of stuff. And I remember like my mom talked a lot about like in the 70s and sort of how she fought and all of this that she had to do. And my generation of feminism is like a little bit different. But then I look at the people that are younger than me, and then sometimes I'm like, you guys don't even know, you don't even know how bad it used to be. But I think the flip side of that is that they are just more inherently aware of like, yeah, men and women are equal. Men shouldn't get, special privileges. And so things like this too, right? Like just like gender is a spectrum. They just
Mhm.
sort of understand.
I
So
get
I think
asked a
that,
lot by younger people what it was like in the 60s, 70s, 80s. They have no clue. They
Yeah.
love hearing about it.
yeah.
Make them appreciate what we've got now.
Yeah,
With a few exceptions, we've kind of gone backwards in a few places, but we're going to regain ground there, I'm sure.
Yeah. I mean,
we
that's,
have communication
Yeah.
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 and they can't take that away.
True. Well, Callie, this has been wonderful today. Anything else that you want to share with us before we wind this up?
Just thank you again for your time and for this podcast and creating for this space for conversation and storytelling. I think it is really important.
Yeah.
As I said, I think it's about hearing those one-on-one stories and that human connection. And there are probably a lot of people who aren't in an environment where they can find this stuff. So even if it's not an in-person conversation, I'm happy that these conversations are happening. So maybe people
Right.
can hear them if they need them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what we're
That
hoping. Plant some seeds, get people thinking about things, and you're a beautiful example of that, Callie. Wendy, what else do you have for Callie today before I wind this up?
well, you're altogether correct about conversations. Nothing's going to change if people like myself stay hidden. Get out there and talk to people.
Yeah.
That's it. And thank
Yeah.
you for doing this with us today. You were fantastic. And
Thank
as a
you.
mom, you're amazing. Thank you.
We all
Thank you
wish we
so
had
much.
moms like you.
Oh, I wish my mom was like you.
Well, Callie, thank you so much for sharing your story, your heart, your family. It's just been wonderful today. It's one thing to talk about these issues, and it's another to hear about real children who have real parents who just want to wear clothes they like or use pronouns that fit. They're growing up to know that they're deeply loved, and that's something that I think is so important with what you shared with us today.
Mhm.
You've
Yeah.
you've really given us a glimpse of what it looks like when love is your starting point. It's not an obstacle, it's your starting point. And the family experience that you're sharing can kind of be a blueprint for what's possible, I think. More people need to grab a hold of that. So we're grateful to you for sharing your private fears and what loving a child in the United States today means, and the deep joy of watching your children move through this world with confidence and love and self-acceptance and all those things that we all wish we had a stronger foundation for when we were growing up.
Yeah. I guess I'll say one more thing.
Sure.
To you, Wendy, and to any other trans people in the audience, I love you and I'm glad you're on this planet. And if you're struggling right now, it will get better. And there are other people out there who love you.
I know. Thank you.
Callie, thank you. So, to our listeners today, we invite you to sit for a moment with what you heard today. What would it look like in your family or in your classroom or your faith community or your workplace if gender diversity were treated as normal, as ordinary, like being left-handed or having blue eyes or red hair or whatever? What might fear or old stories still be shaping what you're thinking about and how you're looking at people who are transgender and non-binary kids? Even if you consider yourself affirming and open-minded, what's going on in you? So please sit with that and think about what this means. If something Kelly said nudged you, stay with it. Let it be an invitation, not a shame spiral. And maybe it's choosing different language with your kids or your grandkids. Maybe it's speaking up next time someone makes a joke. Or maybe it's just listening more closely when a young person starts to talk about their pronouns or a new name or they're questioning what's going on. Listen and be respectful. So we hope that today's conversation really encourages you to examine your own attitudes and your own thoughts And that's how change starts, like Callie was saying, quietly, one person at a time inside each of us, and then slowly getting it outside into the world. So on behalf of Wendy Cole, my fabulous co-host, and myself, Lynn Murphy, thank you to our audience for spending this time with us today and for demystifying the transgender journey. We're doing real stories about real people. So if today's conversation resonated with you, please remember to like, share, subscribe, comment. Really share this with anyone you think who's going to benefit from this, because your support helps us build our audience and get the word out even farther. So until next time, remember our motto: stay curious and stay kind. Thank you for joining us today on this episode of Demystifying the Transgender Journey. Remember to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode of our fascinating interviews. You can also find more information on our website, thetransgenderjourney.com. So until next time, stay curious and stay kind.